Let's talk a little bit about coronavirus.
Yeah.
So coronavirus, you've been around. If you've done 10,000 surgeries in your lifetime, you've been around for a while. Have you ever seen a time? I've only been in the States since November 28, 1990, which is 30 years is coming up in 2 weeks. Have you ever seen a time where a virus has scared Americans as much as this has, where it's forced the government to shut us down and handle it the way we've experienced AIDS, cancer, a lot of different things that we've had, but I've never seen the reaction, at least myself, I've never seen it, but yourself, maybe you have a different perspective on this. What do you think about the reaction America and the world's had to coronavirus?
No, I mean, we've never had anything like this. The closest thing was the H1N1 flu, but luckily it wasn't even close. Back then, we thought that was potentially going to be the next pandemic. And if you remember, we really thought that maybe the SARS virus, the original SARS or MERS, was going to be the next pandemic, but luckily, for whatever reason, neither of those panned out. But yeah, this coronavirus, I don't want to say we were caught flat-footed, because I think there were a lot of people who saw the writing on the wall quite early. And we could spend all day talking about this, for whatever reasons, we didn't do a good job. Let me just give you a California example. One of the things that happened to us in California is that very early on, Gavin Newsom shut California down, and shut it down early, and locked it down hard. And we never really got, that initial big spike that New York had or Washington had. And we did very well. And then I think we opened up too early. And it was Memorial Day. I can remember, was actually walking on the beach in Santa Barbara on Memorial Day. And there was still a rule that you could not sit on the beach, you could not gather on the beach, but the beaches had actually been locked down. You couldn't even walk on the beach. So Memorial Day came. The beach was more crowded with more human beings than we had ever seen on July 4th. I mean, it was insane. We actually turned around and left, and we went, what the heck? Well, 2 weeks after that, we started our first spike, and we had opened up the bars and we had opened up the restaurants, and luckily we clamped down. We didn't clamp down as hard, but whenever you see these sorts of events, and it's happened everywhere, these spikes follow these openings. Now, you can't stay closed forever. And one of the things I wrote an editorial in Thrive Global a few months ago, I think one of the mistakes we've made is let's use the World War II analogy. We could not stay in the bunkers in England for 5 years while Germany was dropping bombs on London, waiting to develop the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project. Nobody would have been able to do that. But what Churchill says is, we are going to fight them in the air. We're going to fight them on the beaches. We're going to fight them on the land. We're going to arm ourselves. We're going to equip our troops, and we're going to fight. And what we haven't done is we have not fought this virus personally with what we know can actually help us fight this virus. And if we applied what we already know about preventing ourselves from, number one, catching this virus, and number two, if we get this virus, making it a mild illness rather than a lethal illness, we'd be so far ahead already. So maybe that's a good intro to maybe where you want to talk about.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because, so I remember where I was at when I'm having a board meeting in LA and I get a call. All my board members are not coming from Greenwich and New York. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Oh, it's coronavirus. You're serious? Yeah, it's March 12th. I think that's the day NHL, NBA shut down and Disney and everybody was shutting. I'm like, you guys are really not coming to LA? No, we're not coming. This is serious. Okay. So I start calling around and then I come back to want to do my own research and bring my wife, Mike. We were planning on going to Universal Studios. I said, why are we staying here? Because if this is happening, let's just go back to Dallas. So we came back to Dallas. And when I go back and I look at data that I pulled up with SARS, MERS, Ebola, any of the ones that you look at, none of them we knew how bad they were going to be. None of them do we really have the real R naught score on how infectious it is, right? How quickly is it going to spread, right? Just like COVID, we didn't know yet. We didn't have that kind of data. It's not long enough for us to know that kind of data. Why is it that we didn't shut down with the other viruses that they showed up, but we shut down with this virus? And how do we make a decision like that? Because for me, you know how you want to go buy a house or you're selling your house. When you want to sell your house, you call your realtor and say, I want to sell this house. What should we sell it for? Let me look at the comps. Okay. What's it sell it for? I know you want to sell it for $1 million, but your house is probably an 850. I think it's $1 million. It's not $1 million. It's 850. And you have this argument with your realtor, and then you get off the phone, you talk to your wife, and you say she has no clue what she's talking about, the realtor. And then you finally realize she has a clue what she's talking about. And you say, let's put it for $899. Okay. Who gets the comps to say, how do we handle other viruses in the past? If we've never shut it down on any virus, how much data do we have to say, let's shut it down now? What is your, response to that one? Because to me, there's a part of me that wonders, was it a reaction? Was it an overreaction? Was it an how do we know? Where does the intel come from to say it's the best thing to do right now is to shut down?
Well, I think, let's talk from the United States. We did have intel coming out of Wuhan, and we did have intel coming out of Italy early on that this guy was a bigger mischief maker than anyone would have predicted. I mean, after all, this is a coronavirus is the common cold. So one of the things that I think we should have guessed is that the common cold is incredibly infectious. It has an infectivity rate that is so infectious that we take it for granted. I'm going to get a cold this winter, and I know I'm going to get one. And the person next to me sneezing is going to give me a cold, or shaking hands, I'm going to get a cold. So I guess we should have known that from day one, this coronavirus is highly infective. I think the other thing that we luckily knew from Wuhan and particularly Italy is that this, we didn't know why it was, but this had the ability to overwhelm our ICU and ventilator capacity. And that was different than SARS and MERS. And it was even different than the H1N1 flu. And very early on, we, again, the evidence out of both Wuhan and Milan and Bergamo was that this had the capacity to, just literally wipe out our ability to take care of people. So I think at that point, the knee-jerk reaction, which I think the knee-jerk reaction was probably the right knee-jerk reaction, just to prevent overwhelming facilities. And again, we're starting right now to get right where we were, in March. We're heading to overwhelming facilities that have no ability to keep up with this, and in places where one wouldn't have ever imagined it.
Yeah.
I'm originally from the Midwest, and the idea that North Dakota, would be an epicenter of overwhelming their hospitals is like, oh yeah, right. we're all farmers. Who's going to get infected?
Yeah.
So
Night and day with North and South, though. If you look at what South is doing versus North, very interesting how North got hit, but South was, good to go. And South had a different approach to it than North took. It's very interesting what they did there.
yep, yeah.
So okay, so fair enough. So then the next question from your optics becomes, we're going to have another virus in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. This is not going away. It's not like 7.7 billion people are not going to create more viruses. Do you think this becomes the standard for moving forward when we do have another one? Any president that's the sitting president is going to be pressured to bring their, expert from CDC, whoever that Dr. Fauci of 2028 is going to be, or 2039 is going to be, to say, yep, I think we got to do what we did in 2020. Let's shut it down for 6 weeks. Do you think that kind of becomes a standard?
Well, yeah, the other thing that's happened to us, all of us have been used to global travel. Think nothing of getting on a plane or getting on a boat and flying all over the world just instantaneously, and think nothing about that. And I think as a consequence of that, we've now, with this global economy, we're gonna, and it will open up again. I have no doubt about it. And we'll get back to, quote, normal. And that will just put us in a position for the next great virus to do it again. We forget that, the Spanish flu, which, by the way, started in Kansas. I hope most people know that. US troops that were trained in Kansas actually caught the Spanish flu and gave it to the world. But, and so the idea that this is the Chinese flu is, sorry, we did
So you don't think it happened? You don't think it started in China? You don't think it's
no, but let's remember that our coronavirus, our COVID-19, is the European mutation of the Chinese virus. So our COVID-19 is the mutant. So we have the European. Believe it or not, the Chinese virus of COVID was very isolated to Washington State and a bit of Oregon. But the rest of us all came in through New York, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., from Europe. So if you want to call it, let's call it the European virus. It's better named, but it's silly putting a name on this stuff. But yeah, we're going to have another one.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if it's a standard. Like, does a standard become the next one we have to shut it down again? The next one we have to shut it down again, just to make sure we don't make because it's so much risk if you don't shut it down, right?
Well, I think we have to, for this one, this guy right away in Wuhan, before they even knew what this was, there were scientists saying, this is really weird. People are getting pneumonia and they're getting on a ventilator, and we have no idea why everybody who's coming in with this illness is winding up on a ventilator and dying. We don't know what's going on. So I think that's different. For instance, the flu absolutely kills lots of people. I can name numbers of people that I've cared for with flu. But what was happening with the flu is that these people got a consequence of having the flu. They had a heart attack, or they caught a pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, or they had kidney failure, but they didn't die from the flu. And we have to make that distinction. It's the sequelae of having the flu that you die from, not the flu. In this one, it was, holy cow, there's something weird going on because people are coming in here and they're sick and they're all ending up on a ventilator. And you could count on, one hand the number of people I've ever had to put on a ventilator who walked in with the flu. So it was a totally different animal. And so hopefully the next, whatever virus it is, and who knows what it's going to be, hopefully it may not appear in this way. Maybe, this virus will go, maybe this virus will attack the heart more than this one does. Maybe this virus will attack the kidneys. We just don't know.
From watching it in your world of expertise and how we learned this one, because again, this one leaves data for the rest. How do you think we could have handled it differently this time around so we do the right time next time when we do get one? Meaning, if you're watching it saying, here's Fauci, we shut down China, what could we have done differently? I know when even originally when Fauci said there's no way in the world we're going to get a vaccine within 18 months, and within 9 months, Pfizer's coming out with a vaccine that could potentially be ready. It's a 90% efficacy. He himself didn't think that was going to be taking place. So for them to announce that, it's a pretty big deal. What did we learn from this one that we could have done differently for the next time around?
Well, that gets back to what we talked about before. So the people who are at risk for this virus, for the most part, have pre-existing conditions. And if you actually look at what pre-existing conditions are, we're talking about obesity, we're talking about pre-diabetes, we're talking about insulin resistance, we're talking about hypertension, we're talking about heart disease, we're talking about being on medications. Now, Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, said that all disease begins in the gut. And one of the things I've learned is, I don't know how he knew this, but the guy was absolutely right. And in fact, I'll pull away and maybe your viewers can see this. The road to health is paved with good intestines. And what I've tried to convince people is that if you do not have a leaky gut, and if you do not have insulin resistance, then your chance of getting COVID is quite low. And if you get COVID, it is going to be a mild illness. Now, let me bring that home for an example from last week. I saw a woman who's been a patient from mine who's a snowbird. Mm-hmm. She and her husband she's 85, he's 86. She's been my patient. He laughs at the fact that she does all this crazy stuff with me. They caught COVID in March, and she, it's night and day. She had it for 48 hours. She says, yeah, it's kind of like the flu. He ended up in the ICU for 45 days. Nearly didn't make it. It was touch and go, but he's just recently gotten out of the hospital. He went in March.
45 days, wow.
45 days in the ICU on a ventilator. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we've done with her is we've kept her vitamin D level above 100, as I do with all my patients. Most docs say that's toxic. I can assure you it's not. There's now 6 different human studies that show people with high vitamin D, the higher the vitamin D, the less likely you are to catch COVID. And if you catch it, it's going to be mild. The lower your vitamin D, the more likely you are to catch COVID, and the worse it's going to be. And here's 85-year-olds who couldn't have been night and day different. She followed what I asked her to do. We knew what her vitamin D levels were. For instance, her vitamin D, when I saw her last week, was 105. Yeah. And she said, boy, is he listening to me now.